Chapter 12 of Anne Veronica. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joy Chan. Anne Veronica by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 12th. Anne Veronica puts things in order. Part 1. Anne Veronica made a strenuous attempt to carry out her good resolutions. She meditated long and carefully upon her letter to her father before she wrote it, and gravely and deliberately again before she dispatched it. "My dear father," she wrote, "I have been thinking hard about everything since I was sent to this prison. All these experiences have taught me a great deal about life and realities. I see that compromise is more necessary to life than I ignorantly supposed it to be, and I have been trying to get Lord Morley's book on that subject, but it does not appear to be available in the prison library, and the chaplain seems to regard him as an undesirable writer." At this point she had perceived that she was drifting from her subject. "I must read him when I come out, but I see very clearly that as things are a daughter is necessarily dependent on her father and bound while she is in that position to live harmoniously with his ideals." "Bit starchy," said Ann Veronica, and altered the key abruptly. Her concluding paragraph was, on the whole, perhaps, hardly starchy enough. "Really, Daddy, I am sorry for all I have done to put you out. May I come home and try to be a better daughter to you? Ann Veronica." Part 2. Her aunt came to meet her outside Canongate, and, being a little confused between what was official and what was merely a rebellious slight upon our national justice, found herself involved in a triumphal procession to the Vindicator Vegetarian Restaurant, and was specifically and personally cheered by a small shabby crowd outside that rendezvous. They decided quite audibly, "She's an old dear, anyhow. Voting wouldn't do it no harm to her." She was on the very verge of a vegetarian meal before she recovered her head again. Obeying some fine instinct, she had come to the prison in a dark veil, but she had pushed this up to kiss Ann Veronica, and never drawn it down again. Eggs were procured for her, and she sat out the subsequent emotions and eloquence with the dignity becoming an injured lady of good family. The quiet encounter and homecoming Ann Veronica and she had contemplated was entirely disorganized by this misadventure. There were no adequate explanations, and after they had settled things at Ann Veronica's lodgings, they reached home in the early afternoon, estranged and depressed, with headaches and the trumpet voice of the indomitable Kitty Brett still ringing in their ears. "Dreadful women, my dear," said Miss Stanley, "and some of them quite pretty and well dressed. No need to do such things. We must never let your father know we went. Why ever did you let me get into that wagonette?" "I thought we had to," said Ann Veronica, who had also been a little under the compulsion of the marshals of the occasion. "It was very tiring." "We will have some tea in the drawing-room as soon as ever we can, and I will take my things off. I don't think I shall ever care for this bonnet again. We'll have some buttered toast. Your poor cheeks are quite sunken and hollow." Part 3. When Ann Veronica found herself in her father's study that evening, it seemed to her for a moment as though all the events of the past 6 months had been a dream. The big gray spaces of London, the shop-lit, greasy, shining streets, had become very remote. The biological laboratory with its work and emotions, the meetings and discussions, the rides in hansoms with Ramage, were like things in a book, read and closed. The study seemed absolutely unaltered. There was still the same lamp with a little chip out of the shade, still the same gas fire, still the same bundle of blue and white papers, it seemed, with the same pink tape about them, at the elbow of the armchair, still the same father. He sat in much the same attitude, and she stood just as she had stood when he told her she could not go to the Fadden dance. Both had dropped the rather elaborate politeness of the dining-room, and in their faces an impartial observer would have discovered little lines of obstinate wilfulness in common, a certain hardness, sharp indeed in the father and softly rounded in the daughter, but hardness nevertheless, that made every compromise a bargain and every charity a discount. "And so you have been thinking?" her father began, quoting her letter and looking over his slanting glasses at her. "Well, my girl, I wish you had thought about all these things before these bothers began." Ann Veronica perceived that she must not forget to remain eminently reasonable. "One has to live and learn," she remarked, with a passable imitation of her father's manner. "So long as you learn," said Mr. Stanley. Their conversation hung. "I suppose, Daddy, you've no objection to my going on with my work at the Imperial College?" she asked. "If it will keep you busy," he said, with a faintly ironical smile. "The fees are paid to the end of the session." He nodded twice with his eyes on the fire, as though that was a formal statement. "You may go on with that work," he said, "so long as you keep in harmony with things at home. I'm convinced that much of Russell's investigations are on wrong lines, unsound lines. Still, you must learn for yourself. You're of age. You're of age." "The work's almost essential for the Bachelor of Science exam." "It's scandalous, but I suppose it is." The agreement so far seemed remarkable, and yet as a home-coming the thing was a little lacking in warmth. But Ann Veronica had still to get to her chief topic. They were silent for a time. "It's a period of crude views and crude work," said Mr. Stanley. "Still, these Mendelian fellows seem likely to give Mr. Russell trouble, a good lot of trouble. Some of their specimens. Wonderfully selected, wonderfully got up." "Daddy," said Ann Veronica, "these affairs, being away from home has cost money. I thought you would find that out." "As a matter of fact, I happen to have got a little debt." "Never!" Her heart sank at the change in his expression. "Well, lodgings and things. And I paid my fees at the college." "Yes, but how could you get who gave you credit?" "You see," said Ann Veronica, "my landlady kept on my room while I was in Holloway, and the fees for the college mounted up pretty considerably." She spoke rather quickly, because she found her father's question the most awkward she had ever had to answer in her life. "Molly and you settled about the rooms. She said you had some money." "I borrowed it," said Ann Veronica in a casual tone, with white despair in her heart. "But who could have lent you money?" "I pawned my pearl necklace. I got £3, and there's 3 on my watch." £6. Got the tickets?" "Yes, but then you said you borrowed." "I did, too," said Ann Veronica. "Who from?" She met his eye for a second, and her heart failed her. The truth was impossible, indecent. If she mentioned Ramage he might have a fit. Anything might happen. She lied. "The Widgetts," she said. "Tut, tut," he said. "Really, Vee, you seem to have advertised our relations pretty generally." They knew, of course, because of the dance." She knew £40 was a quite impossible sum for their neighbors. She knew, too, she must not hesitate. £8, she plunged, and added foolishly, £15 will see me clear of everything." She muttered some unladylike comment upon herself under her breath, and engaged in secret additions. Mr. Stanley determined to improve the occasion. He seemed to deliberate. "Well," he said at last slowly, "I'll pay it. I'll pay it. But I do hope, Vee, I do hope this is the end of these adventures. I hope you have learned your lesson now and come to see, come to realize how things are. People, nobody can do as they like in this world. Everywhere there are limitations." "I know," said Ann Veronica. £15! "I have learned that. I mean to do what I can. £15. 15 from 40 is 25." He hesitated. She could think of nothing more to say. "Well," she achieved at last, "here goes for the new life." "Here goes for the new life," he echoed, and stood up. Father